Allegedly, the United States and Iran reached a ceasefire on Tuesday. The United States would stop bombing Iran. Iran would stop sending drones and ballistic missiles at nearby US partners. And, most critically, Iran would reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Iran had a very different view of what counts as open, which entailed, quote, coordinating with Iran's armed forces and with due consideration of technical limitations. Interestingly, those technical limitations seem to include a toll being paid, and definitely not in dollars. Maybe yuan, maybe crypto. And that definitely came back into play when Iran declared that the strait was closed again the next day. Regardless, technically open or technically closed, toll or no toll, the results have not been encouraging. The data on this are awfully unreliable, but something like 5 ships passed on Wednesday, 4 went through on Thursday, and while we wait for Friday's finalized numbers, they may be better, but they certainly will not be good. This all comes as we arrive at Saturday and negotiations between Iran and the United States in Pakistan. So how do we have a ceasefire based on the strait reopening not result in the strait reopening? Well, today we have a variety of problems that we need to sort through. At the top is the obvious problem, the distinct lack of a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. But that is a subset of Iran broadly trying to hold out for a better deal, which requires a separate assessment of Iran's chances there. Don't worry, Europe, I have not forgotten about you. We will talk about you guys then. After, we will look at the possibility that internal divisions in Iran are keeping the strait dangerous. Finally, we will venture into the bizarre world where a half-hearted ceasefire has made ships less inclined to make the transit because they want to hold off for a better deal. But let's start with the Hezbollah situation, which is taking our fun little world at war and showing us just how it creates chaos that would be easily avoided if we could kindly return to 1990s geopolitics. On the surface, the problem is that, according to the White House, Trump declared a ceasefire in Iran, which covers Iran, the United States, and, less obviously, Israel. That seemed to match the understanding of Iran's foreign minister based on his release statement. Quote, if attacks against Iran are halted, our powerful armed forces will cease their defensive operations. However, in the middle of the special mullah operation, Israel renewed a long-running battle against Hezbollah. Hezbollah, as a proxy of Iran, had effectively been cut off from resupply. The militant group became a target of opportunity, which Israel did not want to pass on. Well, after the ceasefire began, Israel initiated a particularly aggressive strike campaign, venturing further north than has historically been the case. In response, Iran declared that the ceasefire covered the Lebanon theater, an expectation that Pakistan agreed with. Why this basic point should be the subject of a factual disagreement, I am not sure. I suppose that you would have to ask the negotiators, and further ask ourselves why there is no official document that lays out the terms of the agreement. That sure would make it easier for us to point to the specific passage to determine who is right and who is wrong. I mean, look, it is a bad sign if your planned negotiations are conditional on ceasefire rules previously in dispute, plus a previously undiscussed asset release. But what is not in dispute is the utility of ground news to keep your head on straight. Straight with a GH. My favorite feature of ground news remains the daily briefing, a quick look at 9 important stories for the day, including some stories that segments of the political sphere do not report on, like an MQ-4C Triton drone having to make an emergency descent. And it also helps me break free from tunnel vision and catch stories like a planned Easter ceasefire in Ukraine. And by going to ground.news/lines on maps, or scanning the QR code on your screen, you can take a fantastic 40% off Advantage plan to get access to all of these features and more. So thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring today's video. They have been here for me for the last year, and they will be there for you too. Anyway, through what J.D. Vance has described as a genuine misunderstanding, the end result is that Iran declared the strait closed, thereby killing the single thing that mattered the most to the United States. Getting Israel to stop will not be easy for a couple of reasons. One, there is the long-running problem that Netanyahu will be the subject of endless litigation if Israel's constant state of war ever comes to an end. That creates the traditional personal benefits explanation for war, countering our baseline assumption that war is costly. And two, Israel sees this as an opportunity to finish off Hezbollah. The stars are aligned. Iran cannot provide direct support, Syria has started to crack down on the group, and even the Lebanese government has moved from a diplomatic relationship with Hezbollah to a forceful one. Actually, this is the same bargaining problem that has contributed to the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine going nowhere. Russia, at least as of a few months ago, was still under the impression that Ukraine could not defend its front line, but would have an increased capacity to do so once a ceasefire began. To get a settlement to work, the balance of power right now must be relatively close to what the balance of power will look like after the settlement. Thus, to counter that Israeli incentive, the United States would have to threaten to punish Israel for prolonging the Lebanon front. That is something to keep in mind as bilateral negotiations begin between the United States and Iran. Because if the White House views having to constrain Israel as a costly measure, then U.S. diplomats will seek greater concessions out of Iran. Good luck to everyone trying to sort out that mess. More broadly, Iran's strategy here appears to be trying to hold out for a better deal. Lebanon is just one manifestation of that. Of particular issue here is how Iran is demanding reparations from the United States. Because that will never happen, Iran has generously offered to continue charging tolls in lieu of direct payments. If that becomes the new normal, it would indeed be a major concession. The payments could reasonably go as high as 10% of Iran's GDP. I am not sure how effective that strategy will be, though, because it relies on the Trump administration caring a great deal about Hormuz. Now, obviously, Trump cares about tanker transits. It is a significant political problem for him at home. Iran's problem is that it wants reparations from the United States. Failing to obtain those reparations, it will charge a toll. But Tehran's tanker toll is not paid by the United States. It is paid by the Gulf states trying to export oil through Hormuz, effectively giving them higher production costs. Some portion of that will be passed on to consumers, but the United States only consumes about 20% of the world's oil production. Consequently, 80% of the cost passed on to consumers gets socialized to oil consumers everywhere else. In turn, the toll is a very inefficient form of leverage over the United States. It might result in some degree of flexibility from the White House, but it will not be the equivalent of the toll, precisely because the U.S. disutility is less than the toll. Thus, if Iran sticks to that demand, then it would not be surprising to see the United States reject the deal. What happens after will be interesting. There is an immediate question of whether the United States or Iran benefits more from a 2-week pause, but that is a subject complicated enough to warrant its own video. There is also a question about Arab partners wishing to enter the war against Iran. Indeed, they have shown indications that they are ready to do so. Meanwhile, it is possible that the United States just walks away from the region. Obviously, this would be a major heel move from Trump. Nonetheless, you could see something like that happening because the diplomatic chatter on this front has already begun. The critical unanswered question here is how Europe would respond. Clearly, Trump's course of action has left many in Europe flustered. Some parties, like Spain, were actively trying to stop the United States from making progress in Iran. But where there was unanimous agreement was that no one was going to police the Strait of Hormuz while the United States was pursuing a war. You can see where this is going. What if the United States stops the bombing, but Iran continues the tanker tax? I mentioned in yesterday's video that third-party sentiment determines the strait's coercive power. If countries like France think that Iran is being the unreasonable actor, then closing Hormuz does not put political pressure on Iran's opponent. Rather, it lands squarely in Tehran. As a result, you can see how some European states might start shifting their stances. Not because they suddenly love Trump, but because Iran has become the troublemaker. While we wait for that to happen, Trump continues floating the idea that the United States might walk away, because if that scares them into issuing some kind of assistance, that ends up being a win from the Trump administration's perspective. Then there are a couple of less obvious reasons that tankers may still be reluctant to cross the strait. One is internal divisions in Iran. This concern was apparent from the first hour of the ceasefire. The message from Iran's foreign minister proposed more constructive steps moving forward, while the military appeared to be taking a harder line on Hormuz sovereignty. Furthering public speculation about a rift between the two, drones struck Saudi Arabia and the UAE in the hours after the ceasefire came into effect, suggesting that someone in Iran was trying to undermine the agreement. Now, put yourself in the shoes of a captain of a tanker sitting in the Gulf. Iran has given you instructions about how to safely pass the strait. Follow them, and everything will be fine. Do you trust that every Iranian with a missile launcher is in line with those terms? If not, then you might want to hold your tanker in safer waters. It will be difficult to change those captains' minds overnight. A ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah would be a start. Then just having a longer time period without drones or ballistic missiles fired on Arab states would also help. But it might take a full settlement before traffic returns to normal, toll or no toll. Although Trump prefers quick negotiations, historically it takes months to go from a ceasefire to a final settlement. Finally, there is the possibility that the ceasefire, half-hearted as it may be, is encouraging tankers to wait. Furthermore, it is the half-hearted nature of the deal that is causing them to slow down. This time, put yourself in the shoes of a tanker company. One of your vessels is stuck inside of the Gulf. At a high level, you want to get it through the strait because it holds hundreds of millions of dollars in black gold, which does nothing for you until it can reach a buyer. But every day that the tanker is not moving is a day that the tanker is not picking up another shipment, probably from a less dangerous port. Under normal circumstances, chartering a tanker could cost up to $100,000 per day. Being anchored for 42 days translates to $4.2 million lost, more than double what Iran was charging to get out. Combining the value of the oil and the opportunity cost of the standstill, you would think that the tankers would have great motivation to get a move on. And indeed, rewinding to a few weeks ago, the expectation that nothing would change encouraged many companies to bite the bullet and pay the toll. However, if you think that a deal is just around the corner, a real deal, not a half-hearted one, and not one that requires a toll, then it is better to sit and wait just a little longer. Part of that thinking may be looking at the safety issue from a moment ago. Another part of it may be that shipping companies do not believe that Iran can continue imposing tolls without the United States restarting its bombing campaign. Internalizing that, Iran would fully reopen the strait as the ceasefire calls for, and so there is no need to pay the $2 million. This would help account for a bizarre observation about the tanker flows. More appeared to be moving right before the ceasefire than right after it. Those that left the Gulf right beforehand were wrongly betting that the conflict would persist for weeks. Perhaps those leaving now are skeptical that the ceasefire will last, and so they want to take advantage of the slightly safer conditions while they last. But the remainder are holding off until a better outlook emerges. And if they have made the wrong bet here, then maybe they will eventually bite the bullet and pay the toll. So, what are our takeaway lines for today? Whatever the exact technical status of the strait is, the number of transits is not looking good. The obvious problem is Israel's expanded strikes in Lebanon, and Iran's view that continued conflict there breaks the ceasefire. This is a subset of Iran's broader desire to extract a better deal out of the United States. Less obvious is the risk that tankers face from internal actors in Iran trying to play a spoiler role in negotiations. And, strangest of all, the promise that the ceasefire created maybe convincing some tankers to hold off until even more favorable circumstances arise. Thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring today's video. Go to ground.news/linesonmaps or scan the QR code on your screen to take a fantastic 40% off a Vantage plan. Meanwhile, you can keep the videos flowing with more content about the Iran war. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.